Did you see the Wordle today is only 4 letters?
That's weird.
Yeah, no vowels either.
What was it?
CDBG.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you know about CDBG?
Oh, yeah. It's the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG.
And what are those?
I'm so glad you asked. Let's take it back in time a little bit. It's January of 1973. So in January of 1973, President Nixon declared a moratorium on all U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development spending on assistance programs for housing and community development.
All the funding just stopped? Why?
Well, Nixon cited corruption and mismanagement in the department, so he wanted to take a break from spending altogether. Some argue that the public housing programs and other resources for low-income communities was building momentum at this time, so they questioned Nixon's motivations.
I'd imagine that had a huge impact on cities.
It definitely threw a wrench in some cities' development plans. But the following year, Congress passed the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974, which restarted funding and reformed the program. The new program, the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, consolidated 10 previously siloed programs, giving cities more flexibility and autonomy to decide how they're going to spend their money. Before this, the federal government made all of those decisions. It was a real game changer.
That was a significant pivot in the way federal grants were administered, because cities and states only had to follow broad guidelines, and they had a lot of the decision-making power.
CDBG hasn't changed too much since it was created, but there is less funding. CDBG funds reached its peak in 1979 with $15 billion allocated to cities. The fund is now around $3 billion, and it just hasn't kept up with inflation.
And aren't there just more big cities since the legislation was passed?
You guessed it. The dollars are spread thinner because there are more eligible communities now than there were back in 1975. The number of cities or counties competing for these grants has increased 86%, but the pot of money is actually getting smaller.
So how does the federal government decide who gets the money?
They use the same formulas that they used back in 1974, plus they added a second one in 1977. Formula A looks at population, people in poverty, and overcrowded units. Formula B looks at population growth lag since 1960, people in poverty, and pre-1940 housing units.
So if funding has been decreasing at the federal level, I take it Cleveland has also been getting less money.
Yes, Cleveland's funding peaked at $40 million in 2002, and they've been receiving about $21 million for the past few years.
Okay, so how does Cleveland spend its money?
I was hoping you'd ask. Let's look at where some of the money went in 2021. $126,000 to community gardens, $850,000 to demolition and board up, $1,422,000 to CDCs, $280,000 to senior home repair programs, $50,000 to storefront renovation programs, $672,000 to homeless services, $5,585,000 to general administration.
Okay, I think I'm seeing a couple of different buckets of money here. I'm seeing community development corporations and other nonprofit organizations, city-run programs and services, and administrative stuff like staffing. Is that right?
Yes, those are some typical allocations. Plus, every council person gets their own chunk of money to spend however they'd like, within the parameters of the CDBG requirements.
And they spend it on similar stuff, like CDCs in their ward?
Yes, and Cleveland is actually unique in the United States for this. Cleveland alone spends a huge chunk of its dollars on community development corporations. Cleveland CDCs submit applications to the city during this whole process, so the city can decide how much each CDC is getting based on a competitive process.
Real quick, what is a community development corporation?
A great question. Community development corporations are 501c3 nonprofit organizations that offer services and engage in other activities that promote and support community development. They're usually place-based, so they cover certain geographies and specific neighborhoods.
Is there anything that CDBG does not fund?
For sure. Community development and revitalization is a really huge umbrella, but you won't see CDBG fund things like public safety or staffing costs outside of the Community Development Department.
Okay, so I have an idea of where CDBG funds go, but who decides it and how?
Things more or less start in the Cleveland City Council Development Planning and Sustainability Committee meetings, DPS for short.
So we are picking up in our CDBG budget hearings.
DPS holds hearings, usually full-day consecutive hearings for a few days or maybe a week, and all council people plus representatives from the administration are invited. These hearings happen in February.
I imagine they consider a combination of things. Looking at the past budgets, considering how CDCs and programs spent their money during the last cycle, how successful those orgs and programs were, and new and rising challenges in the city, plus a lot more.
Yep, City Council and the Mayor's administration hash out a plan for the dollars together. It goes through the Finance Committee after DPS and then is voted on by the whole council. But it's only an estimate.
What do you mean, only an estimate?
The city is required to pass a piece of legislation accepting the funds before they are even notified of how much money they are getting. So the federal government tells them sometime in March how much money they're getting exactly. So they pass this piece of legislation in February, which is pretty close to what the final budget will look like, but then more adjustments are made in March and April.
So the council and the mayor's office just revisit all of this again in April?
Yes, plus a subcommittee that includes some members of the mayor's administration, organizations like Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, council staff, and some others. They come together and review and score the CDBG applications from CDCs that I mentioned earlier. They score those applications and then they make recommendations to the administration. These recommendations account for about 25% of the whole CDBG budget.
So the mayor's administration takes those recommendations into account to decide how to spend their CDC bucket of money.
Yes, and then the mayor's administration forms their final recommendation and presents that budget to the DPS committee. This is usually sometime in April. Since council and the administration have been in conversation this whole time, there usually isn't too much to be adjusted. But any council member can attend these DPS meetings and council can shift around money if they'd like to. Then it moves to the Finance Committee. In an ideal world, and with strong lines of communication between council and the administration, there shouldn't be any major changes at this point. Then it is finally voted on by the whole council. Whew!
That was a lot of information.
Yeah, it was, but fortunately, Cleveland Documenters are going to be covering all of the CDBG hearings, so you can find them at Cle Documenters on Twitter and look at their live tweets or find their notes at documenters.org.
Did they pay to say that?
They did.